Hello. Good evening to everybody. Thanks for coming. Just had a little incident with our dog, and so I'm running a couple of minutes late. Fortunately, all is well. And this evening, first, before we get started, I wanted to see where everybody's from. So if you can just put in the chat where you're from, what state, what country, that'd be great. Hello, thing one. Let's see. Tonight, I'm so glad that we've got Miss Jules back, and we hope that she'll have a moment to talk a little bit about the trauma responses and how people, most of whom, if you're a human being, have been through trauma in some form in your life, and just talk about trauma in general. And then we're going to talk a little bit about some steps that folks can take. I wanted to remind people that we are not giving out any specific diagnoses either for any of the suspects or victims of true crime, nor can we or do we want to diagnose anybody in chat or anybody who's listening here. Think of this as an adult continuing educational moment. And you don't have to take notes. You can just enjoy. I see we've got folks from Minnesota, Colorado, Louisiana, San Antonio, Texas. I see Canada is in the house. Iowa's in the house. North Florida, Minnesota, and Oregon. Hi, Miss Cinnamon Hot 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 and Jean Madison. I'm waiting for my daughter, one of them, to come in as a mod. Not sure when they'll be ready to do so. Oh, I see Francesca's in the house, my daughter. Do I unmute you or do you unmute you? And then, let me see, shall I add Miss Jules?
Yeah, you can add Miss Jules.
Hello, Miss Jules.
How are you doing?
How are you?
I'm fine. I just ran up my stairs and back down my stairs because I got all ready to go and I had no microphone.
Oh, okay. Do you need some oxygen?
I'm good. I'm good. Hi, Francesca.
Hello.
She's tending to her dog.
Poor baby. Where did you go?
I'm right here.
Okay.
Francesca, my daughter, is here again to help moderate, and I don't know what she does. She's my directress, I think. Francesca, yes.
So I guess, should we start with our little PSA for everybody? Not sure.
Oh, public service announcement? Sure.
Yeah. And I guess maybe we'll do it at the end of the live as well. Like, you know. But I guess thank you everybody for being here. So just something we've been kind of talking about, my mother and I, that we're thinking. So recently she got monetized. So congratulations to her. But so we want to try to do some good with that. And the last couple times we got some super chats and stuff, which, always appreciated, but, obviously never, we don't expect that. However, for the ones that we do get, we wanted to try to do something good. So what we've decided is, so it's going to take a little bit, kind of put it together, but for the month of February and each month, hopefully going forward, we are going to pick a cause. Part of it will be, you viewers giving us some suggestions, but a cause, a charity, something near and dear to your heart. We're going to do a poll on our community tab, and we're going to kind of vote, and all the super chat money, or a portion of it, and the portion of the monetization will be going toward that charity that is kind of voted upon by the community. So again, that'll start in February. We'll get more details as we move closer to that point, but just so everyone can kind of, maybe shoot us, in the comments or in chat tonight, just shoot us just an idea of, if you guys know of any charities that you would like us to consider. We're going to be looking at as many as we can. And again, narrowing it down to, I think, 3 we can do for a poll. And again, the viewers will vote, and that's where a portion of the money that was made that month will go, and we'll include receipts and all that stuff as well. But just so you know, just so
What did you say about receipts?
so the receipts, once we do the donation, everything, we'll put that also in the community tab as well. But just yeah, so if you have any suggestions for any organizations, nonprofits, and again, anything cause near and dear to your heart, definitely put it in the comments, in the chat. We're going to be writing a bunch of them down, and we'll be letting again, everything will be in the community tab once we decide which kind of narrow it down for the month of February. But yeah, so just something to keep an eye out for.
Right. And I mean, it's obviously going to be it doesn't have to be a huge amount of money that we send.
No, definitely not. Definitely not.
$50 altogether, but we want to honor our community here, and we want to try to make a little difference in the world, because I think the only way to make a difference in the world really is to do your own part ultimately. So I think that would be a good thing. What do you think, Jules?
I agree completely, but it's a great idea.
Okay. All right. Anything else, Francesca?
No, that's it for our back of house stuff. I'm going to remove myself, and you guys can continue on as scheduled.
Okay. But you'll help me in moderating, I'm supposing.
Of course. Yeah, I'll be here just behind the scenes.
Very good. Thank you so very much. Now, I know in a few minutes, I'm going to ask Jules to talk about our theme tonight, and I'm going to also obviously give some input on PTSD trauma and what is trauma, what are the acute and chronic responses to trauma as it does and as it does not relate to the Idaho 4 case, and a little bit about healing. Many people say, is it possible to heal from trauma? And I say absolutely. And I'm sure that you believe, Miss Jules, that it's possible to heal from trauma.
Absolutely. I see it every day.
Although it takes time.
It does take time, and I think it takes a whole life approach, multi-system. It's not enough just to focus on the mood. It's not enough just to focus on the physical health or the setting. It's a whole, kind of like a whole body approach to just good, general, healthy living, and then making sense of the trauma that you've experienced. Very
good. I wanted to, just before you dive in, or I ask you to dive in, I wanted to address the description of my title just momentarily, and that is that I had mentioned that in the Idaho 4 case, there were 4 obvious victims that are deceased, right? And then you have survivors. You had 2 roommates that were living in the home, Dylan Mortensen and Bethany Funky, I think it is. And they are survivors. So that is important to acknowledge and to honor, because I want to make sure that every live that I go on that discusses a case, and in this case it's the Idaho 4, I want to make sure that with great intentionality that I invoke the names of the victims, whether deceased or surviving victims, their families. Because so often, for instance, in the Ted Bundy case, people talk about Ted Bundy, Ted, Bundy. But do we even remember how many people died? Do we even, I can't even remember one name. And so I don't want these young lives that were snuffed out in vain to be lost to history. And so I want to make my little contribution and with intentionality, try to remember to honor their names. And so I'm going to say Kaylee Gonsalves, Xana Kernoble. Sorry? Xana Kernoble. Ethan Chapin, excuse me, I want to say these again in a minute. And Maddie. Help me with her last name, please.
Mogan.
Maddie Mogan. So I'm going to say it again. I want to remember the 4 victims that are deceased. Kaylee Gonsalves, Ethan Chapin, Xana Kernodle, and Maddie Mogan. And I want to remember tonight the 2 surviving victims, Dylan Mortensen and Bethany Funky. And I also want to remember the families of all the victims, whether surviving victims or deceased victims tonight. That's important. So, segueing into the rest of my description, I did invoke the name of DM. I'm just going to call her DM. It's too much for me to give a long name. Dylan. And the fact that she, per the affidavit, came face to face with the alleged murderer, Bryan, the suspect, Bryan Kohberger. And, you know, there's been a lot of conversation on a lot of different channels around her initial acute response to having seen a strange person clad in all black with a black mask and bushy eyebrows, is the quote, and her having gone 3 times to the door. I don't know if she went beyond the threshold of her bedroom door, but that she made a retreat. And the 911 was not, and this is per the affidavit, notified until about 12 p.m., I believe it was. Was that right, Miss
Yeah.
Jules? 12 p.m., the Sunday, the 13th of November. So then people are like, how could that be? She's lying. You know, we don't know. But the 2 things as a physician that I can tell you, both as a physician practicing family medicine and psychiatry, is number 1, there are acute trauma responses, and I'm going to talk about that. It is possible that somebody has an acute trauma response, makes a retreat into their room, and not that they remain frozen for 8 hours, but that they could remain fearful for their life, for not knowing what was going on, and make the decision not to notify the authorities. Okay. 8 hours does seem like a long time.
Yes.
And we do know from the police from the very beginning, from the chief, that indeed the authorities were not the first people notified, but that, quote, other friends were contacted from the outside and they came to the house. So I don't know what time that was. Maybe it was early in the morning. We don't know. But so her acute trauma response and her delay in notifying the authorities, for all we know, she did contact friends, and that happened within a couple of hours. We don't know. Okay. Number 2, she could have been impaired. If I see lots of young people and not so young people that imbibe alcohol or take part in drugs, especially if they're hallucinogens, and they have a bad trip or they're tripping and hallucinating. And I'm not saying she did that, but it is possible that if she did have drugs and or alcohol on board, she wasn't sure what it is that she saw and wasn't clear on that, closed the door and then went to bed and then got up and said, did I really see that guy? Was he really there? Really second guessing what it is that she saw. So I do believe that when we talk about Dylan in particular and trauma responses in general, we have to remember that they can be tainted, so to speak, by substances like alcohol and drugs, and they can also be tainted by a person's previous history of trauma.
Right.
So I don't think we as outsiders can make a judgment or be critical necessarily because we don't have the whole story. And what you might have done in that situation might be totally 180 degrees in the opposite direction of what this gal did. So I think it's really important not to make judgment, but it is also important to consider things like being impaired, having a past history of trauma, and other outside factors that may have influenced her decision of when to call 911. So I know that was like a long thing. Did you want to say something?
Well, so I do think that it is, everybody understands about substances and, you know, may make it easier to fall asleep or stay asleep longer, you know. But the experience of prior trauma it does have an additive effect in terms of the depth of impairment that you, or the depth of impact that you can get from this condition. So I think with the ICD, you guys are a little bit different. Are y'all diagnosing with complex PTSD?
No.
I think it's called something else. Personality change after a catastrophic event.
Exactly. No, there is no CPTSD in diagnosis. No.
But I think if you parallel the diagnostic criteria for personality change after traumatic event, with the proposed narrative and criteria for the complex PTSD, they track together pretty well, right?
They do track, and
yeah. So in PTSD, we basically look at three factors, and that is, whether you believe that you're still under threat, or you may have this experiential sensation of being under threat, avoidance of potential threat or reminders of the threat you previously had experienced, and then actually re-experiencing the trauma. And that can even include to some degree sensory, include it, having some memories that feel like you're like back in that moment of trauma.
Almost like a flashback.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Almost like a flashback.
Oh, yeah, exactly. A flashback. Yeah. So with complex PTSD, or like with the physicians and the ICD, 10, right?
Mm-hmm.
Their personality change due to trauma or catastrophic event, there's the addition of some additional symptoms that it's additive to the basic PTSD diagnosis. And that would be if you began to experience some interpersonal disturbances, if you develop a negative self-concept, which is sort of where that personality change part of the diagnosis comes into, you begin to see yourself in a different way. You seem like you're somehow changed by the experience. And then finally, an affective dysregulation that can be pretty extreme, even maybe sometimes, kind of hinting at the idea of borderline personality symptoms. So big emotion, extreme, emotion. And so the complex PTSD part is that addition of you had a trauma, but then you continue to experience more trauma and more trauma and more trauma. I think the classical example that's been provided would be like if you were in a concentration camp in Nazi Germany. Another would be, you've done 7 tours of duty in Afghanistan. It's just how people that have been, they're living in a home with domestic violence. Child abuse is one that very often will get a diagnosis with complex PTSD. And by the time you add those 3 or 4 additional experiences to get that complex PTSD diagnosis, this is someone who's really dramatically affected in their day-to-day life. So with the inclusion or the addition of this requirement for interpersonal problems, you'll see people that will completely avoid having a relationship. They might be 25, 26, 27 years old, and they can't go out on a date with a person because they have memories of, well, my mom was married to someone and he terrorized us, and I better not date anybody because I don't want to be terrorized. So it can really interfere with the natural developmental, progression through life that would be perfectly normal to do, but because of the trauma and the powerful force that it's exerting, it stops that movement. Negative concept is a person who's had additive experiences of trauma, and so it now becomes an overall part of their identity. And so they'll have extreme guilt. They'll have feelings of worthlessness. I've had some people describe to me like that they feel maybe like they're evil or they feel somehow contaminated. Another common one that I hear is like they're being punished, that God is punishing them. Also interpersonal sensitivity, where you get the extreme emotions or outbursts of affect, labile affect. So when you start going through these additives that are on top of the PTSD diagnosis, you can kind of begin to see where bipolar can sometimes, people will sometimes be given a diagnosis of bipolar, but if that clinician would take the time to go back and ask about trauma, how many previous episodes of trauma they had, what kind of treatment they had or did not have, then it may be actually more appropriate to give that diagnosis a personality change after traumatic event rather than a personality disorder. It could be the person has just lived in a war zone, and so they're what looks to be maladaptive behavior might actually be survival.
Right.
Do you want to add anything to that?
Well, I will respond to Erna's question in a second, but I agree that it is cumulative and that we can't just take a person in one slice of history or one slice in a moment of time and decide, number one, what are their diagnoses? And number two, pass judgment on their behaviors. So I guess there are two things that I wanted to mention. Once we go a little bit further into your presentation about PTSD and trauma, and I know you have some slides that we're going to show, I will swing back and talk about how some of what you talked about, the sense of guilt that people feel, shame, self-loathing that can happen as a result of a previous chronic childhood abuse or some horrific thing that's happened to them. The sort of the core feelings that define a person that's holding on to their trauma or haven't been able to heal from trauma is a sense of shame, guilt, self-loathing. And then it doesn't help that we live in a society that's very divisive today and that has no problem, adding on and being judgmental and further adding on to, aren't they a horrible person? So,
and if we extend this to what the two survivors are actually experiencing, they are kind of getting the additional judgment and questioning their actions. And I would just like to say, I would be willing to bet, just guessing from the human experience, I would be willing to bet that the two survivors are probably blaming themselves enough that I don't need to blame them. The multiple traumas, the extraordinary level of what they experienced, not to mention having their lives all over every news station, in the world. All of these things we're talking about in terms of the additive effects, the affective dysregulation, they're already experiencing it. We're not helping by going, but why didn't they? Why didn't they do this? Why didn't they do that?
yeah,
They just didn't. They were in an extraordinary situation, and I'm sure that they were in survival mode every bit as much as those soldiers that were in the Afghanistan tunnels. They were just surviving, would be my guess.
Now, I wanted, before we go forward on a discussion further on, I'm going to kind of lay out a few things around I want to talk about the 5 acute/chronic. And I know I've been through this before, but I wanted to review that with everybody. I did want to touch back on some of what you've commented on and other folks, that there have been some publications that may or may not be 15 or 16-year-old Bryan Kohberger's sort of blog feelings about himself and self-loathing, and we talked about the whole concept of visual snow last time, and how that could affect a person's sense of self, sense of self-worth, sense of reality even, right? But I do want to kind of go back there for a minute and say that even if a person has had terrific childhood trauma, is going through adolescent angst and ennui, as we say, existential ennui, number one, many adolescents go through existential questioning about what is life, who am I a good person, am I a bad person, all of that. Even if that same adolescent has had trauma in their past that is on top of and surrounds all of that existential ennui that, let's say, Bryan verbalized and expressed in these blogs, allegedly.
Agreed. Yeah.
That does not offer any mitigation or any forgiveness, whether legally or morally, to the actions that he may have committed in the quadruple murder. So we have to be very careful when talking about criminal activity that the vast majority of us have experienced trauma in our life.
Yeah.
Probably 100% of people go through in adolescence questioning about who they are.
Yeah.
But what? Less than 1% commit crimes like this?
Yeah.
So I just wanted to bring that up because I think some people are already saying and asking, and it's a valid question, if those blogs or blog things were indeed Bryan talking as an adolescent, is that going to help him get out of what he's in now, the hot water? And what are your thoughts? I say no.
No. In terms of guilt or innocence, I think that it's a moot point. Doesn't make any difference. Now, if he does get found guilty and death penalty is on the table, I think they'll offer that as a mitigating circumstance, right?
And we saw that with the Nicholas Cruz case in Florida.
Yes.
That people were upset that he didn't get the death penalty for those murders in the high school. But when they offered all of his horrible childhood trauma and foster care and his diagnosis of being on the spectrum for fetal alcohol syndrome, that is where he was given some lenience and not given the death penalty, but given life in prison. Yeah. So in that case, I agree with you that somebody that has, let's say this truly was Bryan that wrote these things and went through and has self-loathing to this day, in the sentencing phase, I think one can utilize that for mitigation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So thank you, Be Botanical, for your super chat and for your question. I feel terrible.
Even Jodi Arias during her mitigating phase, she offered that she could grow her hair and have it cut to make wigs for children with cancer. She offered that she could.
Oh, instead of being given the death penalty?
Yes, that was supposed to. That's
be a mitigating factor.
Yeah.
That was awfully narcissistic of her, but okay.
Yeah, not mitigating, but just trying to give a reason not to. So, yeah, I mean, I think definitely they'll try to bring up a history of illness of some sort or condition and say, you know, he lived under this constant perceptual onslaught, you know, sensory onslaught. And it made him, he experienced depersonalization, or it made him reactive or violent, or, you know, they'll come up with something to try to mitigate. So
I wanted to go back on, I'm going to Be Botanical, who gave a nice super chat. First of all, I want to thank you and your husband for his service, that we would not be able to be so open with our First Amendment rights and all of the different freedoms that we experience in this country without the, really dedication that people like your husband gave. And I am sorry to hear that he, isn't the same person, although I don't think anybody going through that could ever be the same person. My hope is that, obviously, I'm just offering educational information here, but that even you, years after he has returned from Afghanistan, maybe you'll glean something from what Jules and I say this evening that will maybe help your relationship with him and or help open up lines of communication and healing. And if you get a pearl from our conversation, I will be so thrilled, really, for you. So I thank you for that. All right. Miss Jules, do you want me to quickly go over the 5 sort of acute? And I don't even think I've got my infograph here. I don't know if my daughter has it, but anyway, basically it used to be back when I was in medical school, and even to this day, I even hear some of the older clinicians that come on mainstream media and on social media say there are only 3 trauma responses, and that would be in an acute moment, it's the fright, you flight, or you freeze. Okay. And as we know, Dylan even utilized the term that she froze in shock. So those would be the classic 3. And then in the past decade, there have been more and more. I think as medicine and psychiatry have welcomed the input from psychologists and social workers, we have filled out an understanding that they're really more than the 3 Fs, fright, flight, and fear. And the 2 others that I'm just going to mention are flop, tell you about that in a minute, and fawn, FAWN, which is fawning. And those responses, but even are really more chronic responses to a history of trauma. I'm going to give some examples in a second. And I have my little handmade infograph, by the way, on my community page, if folks want to look back at that, because in that 5 acute/chronic trauma responses, I have arrows that go off to give examples of what people do who really haven't taken an unpacked look at their trauma and begun their healing process, so that, and I can give you one example. The flop is an example. I have seen patients who have let's say they have a history of trauma, and their trauma response, by the way, nobody's trauma response is just one thing. You can have many different ones, but most people have one that they sort of hang their hat on unconsciously. And I'll give an example. I had one gentleman, young, he had to be in his early 20s. His trauma response was to pass out. And not only did he pass out, I pulled a Band-Aid off the guy, just a Band-Aid off his knee. Did I tell the story already?
It's a crazy story.
And he had a grand mal seizure. So
wow.
In other words, he became so, and this goes back to a question from 20 minutes ago, I think. So, and I forgot your name up there in the chat, asked, what are some of the physiologic responses to trauma? And so I'm giving this as an example. You have a guy young man sitting, and I'm like, hi. He's like, oh, I had stitches and went to the emergency room. They told me to follow up with you. I said, okay, let me take a little look at your laceration, your wound. And all I did was just literally go, pulled off the Band-Aid. And he had sort of, I guess, a breath holding. This is usually how it happens.
Yeah.
He froze, and then he must have gotten tachycardic. He had then a breath holding spell. I'm giving the sort of physiology of this. And then you get something called a vasovagal response, where you get low heart rate and you don't get enough oxygen to your brain, so you pass out. And then in addition, this guy obviously has a very delicate threshold for seizures. He had a grand mal seizure, and it was the most remarkable thing I had ever witnessed.
Yeah.
And course, we did call 911 because even though by the time they came, he had awakened. He's like, "What happened? Where am I?" I wanted to.
What'd you do to me?
What did you do to me? I was like, I took a Band-Aid off. But I wanted to make sure, indeed, he didn't have some sort of underlying mass in his brain or a seizure disorder, because truly, in the 30 years since that happened, I've never seen that again.
Yeah.
But that does happen.
Mm-hmm.
I will give you another example. I've had patients, many patients, sadly, I'm going to keep it very general now, who've had a history of SA and or R. I'm sure everybody understands what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
And they, during their annual GYN exam, have had a dissociative episode. And they aren't responding. It's like they become catatonic.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to obviously stop and have them sit up, and we revisit. And what's very interesting to me, because I have been so attuned in my whole life career to body language, nonverbal, verbal, I am very astutely aware or acutely aware when I begin to do a GYN exam of the body language. And often I stop myself, and because I recognize that there's some body language, I'm not going to get specific, that people who've been a victim of SA or R do at the time of their exam. And I'll say, hold on one second. Let's just go ahead and I'm going to have you sit up for a second. And then I'll say to my medical assistant, can you get a little glass of water? And then I use that opportunity to say, I noticed that you seem a little upset or whatever. And usually, and it can be extremely healing for a person.
Right.
Is that they are able to say, how did you know?
Right.
And I'll say, know what? And then they will share, I mean, for the first time in their life, and I have had this happen dozens, if not hundreds of times, where somebody will say, how did you know? I was having a flashback or something bad happened to me.
Mm-hmm.
And then instead of doing the GYN visit, I say, well, let's talk about it. And they will tell me what happened to them. And they will cry sometimes, they will shake, whatever. And I will utilize that as an opportunity for healing.
Yeah.
And so I'm just going to leave that example, and I can give others. But what I am saying to you is that when somebody,
I'm not sure I understand.
When somebody has a trauma, it is often compartmentalized in a portion of their brain. It is walled off, but it peeks out, leaks out on occasion. And sometimes it requires a person to be ready to take a deep dive and get into therapy. But sometimes it can be as easy as a person unloading a secret that they've held that causes them fear, shame, guilt. And that sharing with a person that can keep it confidential, it can't just be Joe Schmo on the road, can be life-changing for that person's trauma. Yeah. So I want to go to say that I encourage people to find somebody, a friend or whatever, a trusted adult that you can maybe identify in your mind, because it is possible to, in just sharing with a non-professional something that has happened to you, that can start and spur you towards a journey of healing. So that was the flaw.
So to go along with that, we know that people that have experienced a trauma where they either witnessed death or they were in fear of their own death, if they can, within about 36 to 48 hours, if they can retell their story, and there's a process of grounding as they walk through the story of what happened, they're much less likely to compartmentalize. They're much less likely to go on and develop those classic signs and symptoms of PTSD. So it's not just telling the story after years of, kind of neurotic type of protection, but even to do it early after the trauma can really help, make sense of what they experienced and avoid the PTSD response.
Yes, and thank you for saying that. I don't mean to say that people should hold it on and then tell your doctor 20 years later or 30 or 20.
Sure.
Ideally, people have an opportunity to acutely get some crisis intervention. And
you get a lot of people that experience these life-threatening conditions and experiences. They will want to talk about it, right? They're kind of being driven to discuss it, and it's their loved ones that say, "Oh, but you're okay now. You're safe. Don't talk about it. You're okay. Just relax. You just need to heal." And, I try to meet with those parents or those people, the caregivers, and explain, let the patient be the guide. If the patient is trying to tell you the story, and if they're trying to tell you the story for the 15th time, go with it. Don't guide them. Don't give them insight, but just keep reminding them you're safe. Thank you for sharing, but let them work through it because they're making some sense of it, in their mind. My daughter and one of her really great friends had a terrible car wreck. The snow blizzard hit unexpectedly. The interstate was absolutely filled with cars and trucks, and it was dark. And so they were trying to get back to the college. They changed their mind where they were going and trying to go back home. Ultimately, an 18-wheeler hit the back end of the car, which sent them first spinning and then flipping. And when the car finally came to a standstill, it was in West Virginia. And so it had hit a rock face and kind of fell down, like kind of on its side, but a little upside down. And so there were some nurses that were actually following behind them on the way to the hospital when it all happened. So the nurses saw it as it happened, and they, pulled over to provide aid. And I talked with a couple of them in the emergency room, later on, and they said that it was so interesting because my daughter's friend was frozen, catatonic, like just couldn't answer a question, couldn't do anything. They wrapped her in a blanket, sat her down in their car, and she just didn't move, for 2 hours. She's just there waiting for them to get the ambulance because of the snow and everything. My daughter had a dramatically different immediate acute reaction that she has no memory of. Like even today, there's no memory. And that is that the nurses said that she began running around and picking things up that had come out of the car, books and shoes and, things like that, began picking things up and running over and putting it back in the car. And they kept saying, you need to come and sit. You need to come rest. And she said, I'm so sorry. Let me get this. Let me clean this up. So it just shows you the brain does very strange things when you are in these types of life-threatening situations, and there's not any reaction that's wrong or bad. It's just your instinctive reaction. And for her, it was to regain control as quickly. Even when it was happening outside of her awareness, she had this drive to put things in order. But her friend was really protecting and had really gotten internally focused. But neither of them really remember anything, being there at the scene. If the nurses hadn't been there, we never would have known, how they reacted.
Well, I want to go back to that, but Marlena Cantu is here, and she's one of my moderators. When she come on, Miss Jules, is she automatically shown a wrench, or do I have to add her every time?
No, if you've given her a wrench, it's automatically there.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
No, well, it's interesting. Not that I'm certainly not diagnosing your daughter, but that response that your daughter had is akin to the 5th F, which is fawning. Yes. Which is, I tend to be a fawner, which is like, can I help? Oh, let me get this. Oh, yes. Oh, And of course, that doesn't necessarily mean it's abnormal, but when you take it to an extreme. So fawning in that moment, your daughter, yes, she wanted control, but she also wanted to be kind and put things together. But then going down the road, if somebody has a chronic or complex PTSD, and let's say they're a fawner, let's say their style is to fawn, that's where you get people who become very saccharine. Oh, I love you so much. Everything's great. Oh, you're perfect. I know. And she's perfect and I'm not perfect. That's the fawning thing. And the reason I bring these 5 things, these 5 sort of styles, let's call it, of trauma up, is because I think if we know what they are, and then we can identify some of the behaviors, then it just helps us as people to reflect, say, I think I'm fawning here. Well, what am I doing? And it helps us to self-regulate, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I think some of these paradigms, I call them, like the 5 F's, let's say, and giving examples, which you can go on my community page to see some examples of the 5 F's and what those behaviors might be, helps us to identify, even just for our own journey, what are we doing to try to mitigate feeling uncomfortable in a given moment. So, do you want to start your little presentation? And if so, I think I need help from my daughter moderator.
Yeah, sure. So we want to just kind of follow up. Okay, so I want to be clear. Like, I didn't make like a PowerPoint presentation because I knew I was going to be here with Dr. Latina and we would be working together. But just kind of as an introduction to the idea, this infographic kind of breaks down, instead of just being, words, it's illustrating how there's different areas of the brain that are in charge of critical survival, right? So with the prefrontal cortex, that is where we are making our choices, hopefully good ones.
Excuse me for interrupting you. I'm sorry. Could you please, for the folks who don't know, show where the front of the head is, and the front of the brain, and the back?
Okay. So where the dolphin is, close to the word amygdala, that's this frontal part up here. Back here where it says the cerebellum and it looks kind of green and scratchy, that's this part back here by the brainstem. Okay. All right. Now then, so these areas are they're helping us complete really critical behaviors and survival behaviors, being able to pay attention, being able to be exposed to information and learn something new. And a lot of that, is very similar to dolphins. For example, dolphins form lifelong friendships. They travel in family units. And so it's kind of interesting that humans are sort of mimicking that. But then we also have the amygdala. And in a minute, Dr. Latina and I are going to talk about which of these systems are most impacted by trauma and which ones are a little bit less impacted. But the amygdala is basically, the thing that keeps you safe. And it does that by emotions. The emotion, if you think of the word emote, it's a feeling, it's a chemical reaction that's driving you into action. And, hopefully it's there to keep you safe. If you get scared, you get this intense sensation that may say, go away or faint or fawn or whatever it happens to be. You can also get angry, and as long as you learn how to manage anger in a healthy, productive way, rather than giving in to the destruction of a lot of energy, then you can learn, anger can sometimes get you out of a real bind and get you unstuck and moving forward in your life. Brainstem is there. It's survival. It's your heartbeat. It's, the basic survival of the body itself without any kind of higher cognition. The fight or flight response can come to some extent there, in terms of it, increase in your heart, if you're going to fight or flight or what you're going to do.
Breath
Cerebellum
holding.
is related to movement. This is the back of the head. Cerebellum is related to movement and coordination. And then your hippocampus is memory and learning and developing a narrative of your history. So those things, those 5 systems together, different lobes, different portions of the brain then can be affected by the different traumas that we experience. Now, the way that the brain is responding to trauma, you can go to that next infographic that's got 1, 2, 3, 4 on it. So the way that, can you hear me? Did I lose you? I'm gone. Okay. All right. So the way that the brain is working in terms of trauma, it's always working. The awareness is there, and we're constantly, the brain is automatically, without much thought, is sort of scanning for danger. The information in the environment is filtering through the limbic system, and it's basically doing an assessment of, are we in trouble here? Is everything okay? Are there any predators in this area? And it's actually a cooperative effort between the frontal, the amygdala, and to some extent the brainstem. Then, if there is, in fact, a threat that is perceived, then the amygdala goes, oh my gosh, we're in trouble. And it sends out an alarm to the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus responds by releasing stress hormones. And the stress hormones then stimulate the sympathetic nervous system, which is where you get your fight, flight, freeze, fawn, or faint. This is that area that was in action as my daughter was running around picking up the debris from the car accident. She wasn't really thinking. She wasn't like looking around and going, oh, I think I'll tidy things up. It was a survival instinct, and it was all happening outside of her conscious awareness. In fact, it was so far outside of her conscious awareness that she didn't even form a memory of having done that.
Are we on the right slide, by the way? I'm sorry. Excuse me for interrupting. Sorry for interrupting you. Does Francesca have the right slide up?
Oh, I think so. Oh, no. Go to the slide that says 1, 2, 3, 4. Right there.
All right. So you might have to go over a little bit of that again because it didn't jive with the infogram. Okay. So your brain, if I start back over at 1, the brain is outside of real conscious awareness. The brain is always, there's a filter on, and it's constantly scanning the environment to see if there's danger. If perceptually you pick up on something that is out of the ordinary, something that shouldn't be there, something that may be loud perhaps, or maybe something that's way too quiet. The idea being there's something here that's not normally here. Are we in trouble? At that point, then you do get this heightened sensory experience. And you know, you might think that, what's her name? Dylan.
No? You might think that that's why Dylan heard somebody say someone's here. There might have been a change in the environment that her brain automatically picked up on, that she sort of honed in then and tried to zero in. Well, am I hearing anything? Like something feels weird. Why does it feel strange? And not really know what it was that was feeling strange. So it's happening without you doing anything at all. It's naturally there to keep you alive. Now, if the brain does perceive a change in the environment, the brain picks up on something that, hey, that we could be in danger here, then it will, the amygdala is really responsible for that. And it does send out a message to the hypothalamus that says, holy hell, we're in trouble. And so then stress hormones are released, and then the sympathetic nervous system is alerted, saying, hey guys, we're in trouble. Y'all better get ready to run or fight or be extra sweet or whatever you're going to do to try to get us out of trouble. Wake up and get ready. And so that fight or flight, freeze, fawn, I missed one,
Flop.
So the 5 Fs are now, front and center, depending on what is about to happen. And that is what was happening with my daughter, is that she wasn't aware of what she was doing, but her brain was like on autopilot. It was in survival mode. And something about that situation was get this back where it's supposed to, get it back where it was before this danger, presented itself. So once the sympathetic nervous system is ignited and or stimulated, and the heart rate has gone up, you're breathing, you're all the blood is rushing to the proper places to prepare you for what you're going to have to do, then the level of fear, frustration, and emotional reactivity to what's happening can either enhance your reaction, or it can actually interfere with your decision making. Mm-hmm. So there's a fight or flight response, but then there's also kind of a moment of indecision that can happen as well. So depending on the situation, the brain may not be kind of reactive and on point and efficient like we would hope. It might be that you get something like my daughter's friend, who ended up, she was distraught and couldn't do anything, and she kind of internalized, right, or froze. And so one might think that in that situation, maybe the fear, the experience that she had, maybe it just resulted in her inability to make a choice on how she should react in the moment. Dr. Latina hit on this earlier, that it becomes very important to understand the impact that prior childhood trauma or even previous adult trauma can enhance the brain-body response. And so it is important, if you've had a history of trauma, it is important to recognize that could predispose you to an enhanced level of trauma reaction should you encounter a new trauma. And so, there is treatment out there. There's healing if you know what to look for in terms of, working with someone. Okay, next slide. So the freeze response is
oops, my bad.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It's okay. So the freeze response, I think, was something that Dr. Latina was going to talk about.
Right, the tonic immobility.
Yes.
All right, well, I mean, you've gone over sort of the brain and where in the brain, in fact, the entire brain is moving sort of simultaneously, and there are connections amongst the different areas of the brain. But the freeze response really, I mean, in some ways, it's an autonomic nervous system response, meaning that, and tonic immobility means that you're just kind of, you're almost like you're flaccid, you can't move. And it's not it's, as you said, it's a muscle lockup, unmoving. And that piece of it physiologically is not under your control. Mm-hmm. And we see a freeze response, by the way, guys, sometimes in a certain type of stage of one's sleep cycle where you are on the verge of awakening and you have something called a hypnopopic hallucination, which it's literally you're awake, your eyes are open, you can hear, you might even have a hallucination. But you're still in a part of the REM sleep, because in REM sleep, when you dream, you don't do anything. That's why you don't jump off a bridge or go kill somebody or whatever your dreams are about. You're in REM sleep. You're not able to actually move. It's your brain's way of protecting yourself so that you can process all kinds of ideas, things that have happened, but you're really tonically immobile. So that can happen and does happen during a normal sleep cycle. Then as you awaken, you can have something called a hypnopompic hallucination. And during those kind of awakening, you're also frozen so that you can have what feels like you're still in a dream state. So, and this is related to Dylan, by the way. This is how I'm going to try to connect the two. You're in a dream state. You're lying in your bed. You're having a dream, but it's your eyes are open and you're halfway awake. And yet you cannot move because you're still in part of the cycle of REM sleep. So take that physiologic phenomenon and fast forward it, so to speak, to somebody like Dylan who gets up, she hears something, opens the door a couple times, then comes into contact or visual contact with the suspect, Bryan Kohberger. And she is like, whoa. And her body has an involuntary freeze reaction. Now, that is a very primitive reaction that we know from primates and even non-mammalians through hundreds of thousands of years have had and continue to have that freeze response in reaction to a perceived threat, because it is thought that if you, this is on the more primitive animal level, if you don't move, you will camouflage yourself and therefore you will protect yourself from death. In humans, okay, we still have some of these primitive responses. So in the freeze response, you have the tonic immobility, you're standing there. At that moment, she may not have been able to move. It's a way of her body just saying, I don't want to die. I'm just going to, yeah. But the negative part of a freeze response, it worked for her. We don't know why it worked. He didn't see her because it was dark or in the dark and she didn't move like this. So it didn't catch his attention, or he saw her and made some sort of a volitional decision not to hurt her. Right. But the freeze response is in some ways not the most generally, if you're generally speaking, the best response, in the sense that on the human being level, when you have a freeze response, human beings, think of your predator. If you're like a roach or I don't know, wherever the freeze response starts in the life chain, if you're at the lower end of animals, those animals don't have all the perceptive abilities, thinking abilities that a human being does. So that freeze response works really well. But in a human being, we still have that primitive response, but our perpetrator isn't just looking and seeing nothing. Our perpetrator is intelligent, so to speak, is able to use many different things, their hearing, their looks, and they're able to say, oh, that person is frozen, I'm going to get her or him. Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to say that the freeze response is not volitional. While it did help Dylan in this instance, it isn't per se on a long-term basis. Mm-hmm. Very, I don't know what the word is. When helpful, there's a better word than helpful, but it isn't something that necessarily is the most advantage.
It's not an optimal response if you're in danger.
Thank you. That's what the word is. It's not optimal. It is
right. We have more effective ways to survive, but you've got to remember your whole brain is working together. And if you're in a novel situation, you've never been in that level of danger before, your brain is going to take over. And that's actually one of the trainings that's done by the military, Navy SEALs, whatnot, is when you are terrified, how do you continue to move? How do you continue to go against that instinct for freezing? And they do in vivo experiences. They put them in experiences where they're terrified, and then they're saying, okay, what's the right optimal choice? And so they kind of develop a map on how to move when they're in a dangerous situation. So it's kind of interesting.
I do think there are absolutely ways that a person can learn to overcome a freeze response or a startle response or that kind of thing. But it does take training. And that's why going to a therapist, a counselor, whatever, to learn some of the methods that can help a person not do that. Now, I know there have been a couple questions that have come up, so I'm going to stop you for 1 second. Beckfist asked a question. I told her I'd get back to her on that. Crime Powwow asks about the white coat syndrome come from PTSD. That's a great question, because the white coat syndrome is when you go to the doctor, they have the white coat on, and as soon as they go to take your blood pressure, you've got out of control blood pressure. Whereas normally you would not have an out of control. You might be, have a normal blood pressure. And yes, I think I had never really thought about the white coat syndrome or white coat effect being a trauma response. I hadn't put that in my head really, but I do agree with you. It is a form, because generally when somebody has a out of control blood pressure and I'm in the room, we'll lay the person down. I will leave the room. We'll turn off the lights, maybe put some music on and say, let's have you come. I will get my medical assistant, not me, to come back in 10 or 15 minutes is usually what we do. And then we retake it. And if it is a white coat, sort of almost like trauma response, fear response, they'll be in the normal blood pressure range. The one thing I will tell you that we do know about the white coat response is that folks that do get that huge increase in blood pressure, even if it's from a trauma response, so that they had a problem, they were hospitalized as a child, whatever, folks that get that blood pressure response are people who, if you look down the road 10 to 15 years, will develop hypertension. So they already have a propensity to getting increased blood pressure. Their trauma response allows them to get that increased blood pressure. But when you get a response based on the white coat syndrome that puts you at 210 over 110, things like that, that is a person that has an underlying propensity to develop hardening of the arteries. I hope that helps.
Wow, that's it. I didn't know that about the future.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So when people have that happen, generally what we say is, okay, let's talk a little bit about what makes you so anxious, whatever, but let's look at some of your risk factors. Do you have a family history of hypertension? What is your body mass index? What are your lipids like? I mean, so it offers us an opportunity to shine light on some of their risk factors going forward.
Mm-hmm.
All right, there was one more question. May I? Jules, I know you're in the middle of your presentation.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, you may.
Someone who is physically conditioned, they're healthy.
Mm-hmm.
Is their blood pressure less reactive to situational changes? Is it more stable, or doesn't make any difference?
No, it does. Generally, it's funny that I just did a blood pressure the other day on somebody, and I knew right away, even though the person was upset, blah, 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 whatever, their pulse, their heart rate was 50. And I said, you must be in great shape. Do you run? Da, da. The person said, no, but I do have a job that requires me to be moving all the time, lifting things, etc. And so their heart rate, their baseline heart rate probably is 40 or something. They're young and they were very anxious with me, but they did not raise their heart rate.
Interesting.
So there's no doubt that being in excellent physical condition does limit the amount that your heart rate can go up in a response to fear. However, I have to say, even in the face of being in excellent shape, having a baseline, almost bradycardic or slow heart rate, folks that have that tendency can still get their blood pressure up. Mm-hmm. Their heart rate may not go up as much as you would expect.
Interesting.
Okay, so Beckfast asked a while back if the trauma reactions that occur, are they based on social experiences versus your DNA? And there, I would answer, you can answer too, but I would say
Can you read that again?
I wish we could pull her up. It's Beckfast. I don't know if Francesca can pull it exactly up because I wrote it down. But this is what maybe she could ask this, or he could ask this again. But I'm going to say what this person asked was, are trauma responses based on and I think what they're saying, let's say you're a flopper, or let's say you're a fawner, or let's say you're a freezer. Is that based on how you were raised, your social experiences, or is it based on your DNA and your hard wiring?
Do you want me to answer that?
First, yes.
Okay. So I am a true cognitive behavioralist. So there is no doubt that I think their trauma response is based on previous social experiences. If you take a person, say a person that was put into organized sports when they were a child, that provides them certain experiences that another child who maybe their preference is piano lessons, right? Maybe they're a really gifted musician. Well, when you're a gifted musician and you're sitting at the keyboard playing, you don't often have a ball coming at your head at 40, 50 miles an hour, right? But if you're playing baseball or soccer, you probably are going to have those moments where you learn to duck and cover. And I think what happens is you develop confidence in your physical body in response to these moments. As opposed to someone who is very cerebral, spends much of their time, in intellectual pursuits. Maybe they're not quite as confident that they can control their body and, move, reflexes, be finely tuned and that kind of thing. And I think it's not just operant conditioning. I think there's some classical conditioning in that too, that they just begin to have a sense of ownership over feeling, inherently knowing how to respond when there's an oncoming threat. What's your opinion?
I concur. I mean, I do think there are some genetic or epigenetic, which I'm not going to get into right now, the whole concept of epigenetics. I would love to get into that some of our genes we can actually, based on our experiences, can be altered. The expression of our genes.
The genetic endowment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I think social experiences are huge. And I actually am going to invoke Francesca's name right now. I haven't asked her permission, but I think she'll be okay. She was a varsity athlete especially in volleyball, amazing athlete, and all from second grade on under great, enormous pressure. And then she also played lacrosse as lacrosse captain as well at the high school level.
Wow.
She had great, what she called athletic IQ.
Yeah.
But with that came her emotional IQ. Mm-hmm. Where when she was under terrific pressure, i.e. in volleyball, and she was the libero and she had to run, and so she knew to move. But when there was great pressure, like we've got, the other team might be 6 ahead and we only have one chance. If we lose this one chance, they win. And she's serving and she had a slam serve. She was unflappable and she learned to be unflappable.
Yeah.
And I saw her on the field. I mean, everything, there was no emotion. The girl was like, you couldn't read her. And people would say, okay, you're 5 feet tall, 4'11". How could she be at the varsity level playing lacrosse? And she would fool them all. And she'd be in, out, in, out, in, out, like a little fox, but no emotion.
Yeah.
Now let's go forward. There have been situations, I won't get specific, where I think she should have responded and instead didn't. And didn't share, like she would just, and people would see that no response as I can get over on her.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be dangerous. So I think I do think earlier positive experiences like a sports where you learn to really hide your emotion for the good can sometimes play out for the bad, depending on different situations. Now, there was another situation where she was in a not so great part of town working. And I remember her telling me, this has got to be going back. She had to be 18 at the time. No, maybe 17. Where 18, she was going to put money, and a man came up to her, and he was just getting closer and closer. And then he started speaking to her in Spanish. We speak Spanish, and but see, I think in that instance, she didn't freeze. She looked like she was frozen, but she continued her transaction. The instant he put his hand on her, and I think this came from her sports, all 4'11" of her turned, took his hand away, and in Spanish said, "Don't you dare touch me, you get out of here now," and said it very forcefully, and he got scared and he ran. Mm-hmm. So I think we can teach, and I think that's what CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy does in the healing of trauma, is to teach people how to think differently, their word self, like what they tell themselves. How do you think differently about yourself? Instead of saying, I'm a horrible person, shameful, guilt, teaching how to change your thinking, but also teaching how to change your physical reactions.
Absolutely.
So I know that was a very, very, very long response. Do you want to take toaster oven? Her question?
How long does it take for grief and heartbreak, guilt of living, to go away? I think it's sort of a multi platform question. I think the process of healing, there is this planning and discernment phase where you set goals for what healing looks like. When you go through some of this training, you learn to be very careful about defining your constructs or your variables so that you know what you're working with. And I think in the case of grief or trauma, especially, I see it a lot too with conditions like obsessive compulsive disorder, where there's a lot of checking or hand washing. You have to develop, part of the healing process is developing in your mind, what will healing look like for you? Like when you say, how long will it take for the grief to go away? Does that mean that you're in your thoughts, you're thinking, well, I want to go back to the way it was before I had this trauma? Or do you accept that maybe there are some traumas, there might be something there to take with you that was positive, even though the vast majority was negative? So it's a bit difficult to give like a time frame. It's more of a period of learning about yourself and a period of being really intentional and planning what it is that you want to do going forward. I find really a lot of people will enter therapy with this idea of, I just want to feel better. I just want to get better. I just want this to be over. I feel horrible. Make it go away. But then once you kind of begin to get into the process, maybe 4 weeks, 6 weeks sometimes, and the person really begins to connect in therapy and really begins to feel comfortable with the process, they almost begin to enjoy the process of change. They like the feeling of being in control of the direction that they're taking. They like the idea of exploring potential for where they want to end up. And so I think that defining goals can be really powerful just in providing a sense of relief, No, I don't know. I think I'll let you answer after I finish.
No, but sorry, I'm interrupted. I'm sorry.
You're okay. I think that we all grow throughout our lives. We all change throughout our lives. I hope I never quit learning. I hope I'm always trying to improve things and make them better. So, so how long does it take for guilt the pain of the trauma to go away, I think relatively quickly you can begin to find relief, and then begin to kind of enjoy that process of growth. One of the first things that I teach when I start working with someone is I begin to teach them some effective behaviors for self-soothing and managing some of the negative experiences that you can have after trauma. And a lot of people are just amazed when they learn progressive muscle relaxation or diaphragmatic breathing or different types of visualization. They're amazed that it can really calm them and make them feel good in the moment. And so I know that's not the exact, answer that you were looking for, but it's an accurate, honest answer. I think that relief can happen relatively quickly within a couple of weeks, but then there's that longer process of learning and growing into a happy life that you define. Okay, Dr. Latina.
I am so sorry. You know what happens is I think you've taken a break, and then I jump in, and that's
You're okay.
Probably my ADHD.
It's okay.
No, I think it's such a great question. I'm going to take it from another perspective of how long does it take? And I'm going to take it from the medical perspective, which I think is very antiquated. And I'm so tickled in the past 5 years, this has been taken away. It used to be that we were taught, and it was in the not the DSM, it was in the ICD-9 and even in the ICD-10, but it's now come to be no longer considered valid. If a person hadn't completed their entire grief course and were back to their baseline within 6 months, that was what we were taught. I'm just being like, I'm doing this because I think I was so opposed to this. Then the person was diagnosed with, quote, prolonged grief reaction.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, what are you talking about? 6 months. I know people that have lost a child and they're still grieving in some measure 6 years. So why would I diagnose them with a prolonged grief reaction?
No, it's natural bereavement, right?
It's natural. And to me, that pathologizes or makes abnormal a person who goes 6 months in one day or 6 years, whatever. I don't believe that we should put a number on grief. Agreed. And that really segues back to what Miss Jules was saying just now, which is, it really isn't a question about a number, 6 months, 12 months. It's about your journey and what goals you have set for your healing from your loss. I also, however, will say that if your grief is going on and on and on to the point where, as Jules has touched on in several places recently when we've spoken together, that it impedes your personal life or your working life or your health, i.e. your diet, exercise, weight, whatever. If it's impeding certain areas of your life that all you're doing is lying in bed crying, then it's time to really take a look and say, wait a second, what am I doing? Am I looking just backwards or am I looking forward? And what goals, like Miss Jules was saying, what goals do I have for my future to work through some of this? So my answer is twofold. I don't think we should pathologize grief, hold on to it for forever, but and say you're wrong. We might hold on to it for forever, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's pathological, right? Unless it completely impacts your activities of daily living, etc. But then that's where we get into depression and personality changes as a result of trauma and grief. So I hope that makes a little bit more sense from a medical perspective. I don't think we should put a number on it.
Good answer, Dr. Latina.
Mm-hmm. Somebody I want to put this up real quick.
And let me, I'll say one more thing to was that toast? Who asked that question? Toasted oven?
Oven toaster or something? Toaster
yeah,
oven?
I think it's toast oven. So my dad, we were great friends. Like when we were young, he taught me to ride horses. He took me to, junior rodeos and play days. And we were just great friends. He was funny. He was a nice man. And he was just a good friend. And he was really my mentor and kind of my influencer as I was growing up and wanted to become a professional. And, he guided me, during my dissertation years. He's saying, make up your mind. It's hard. Don't cry. You either do it or you don't do it, and he was just like, you make your decision, move forward. Nobody's going to feel sorry for you. Just be tough. And so he would, he was an important part of my life. And so I would call him. I was about an hour away from my job at the time. And I would call him in the mornings when I was on my way to work. And so then we would talk, and that was, how we kept in touch. And so when he passed away, there was of course, I took about a month or 6 weeks off because it was shocking and, I wasn't ready for that. And I went through this period of healing, but then it was always that morning drive that the void was there, right? That was the moment that it really, clung. Even now, and I guess it's been 4 years, even now, usually I can talk about him and talk about the things we did together or what I learned. During the day that goes by, he's not in my head telling me, what I did wrong or what I should do right. And, but every now and then, if I'm feeling a little low, maybe I didn't sleep well the night before, maybe I've had an argument with my husband. If I'm already feeling a bit down in some way, then I might think about him and weep, right? Mm-hmm. But if I'm having a good day and I'm feeling strong and I'm well rested and I think about him, the sadness is not there. It's more of just a nice memory and I feel close to him. So I agree with Dr. Latina. I think this is a lifelong change, but it's an overall part of your experiential life that it's your experience of grief is not going to exist alone and separate from everything else. It just becomes a part of everything you do. And if you're already down, you may have more grief. But if you're having a good day, then you'll notice that it feels better. And that is actually normal and healthy.
I think that's really true. I see I was on my phone for a second. I was listening, but I was on the phone because I was trying to send my daughter this 24-hour suicide and crisis lifeline. Yes. And yes. This is for the United States. And since I believe it's late May of 2022, there's no longer an 800 number that you have to remember. You can text this I think it's 988. Yeah. And it will hook you up with an operator 24/7. So I think it's important for people to know because like Jules and I were in our pre-meeting tonight prior to going on to the live stream, we were saying, we are healthcare professionals, but our goal here is not to diagnose folks, and we really can't give out specific professional advice. We can talk in generalities. We can talk about patterns around trauma and grief and life challenges, but we really cannot give each individual any particular guidance. We hope that what we are how do I say this? We hope that what we're sharing with you, you can sort of pick some pearls, so to speak, and learn from and maybe apply to how it affects you. But we also want you to know that if you are in crisis, please don't hesitate to call a hotline as per below. You can text 988, or to call your primary care provider or go to your emergency room.
Yeah, you can go to the emergency room. There's always a mental health provider that's on call. The emergency rooms now have to be staffed with a mental health expert.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't have to suffer. There's somebody there for you.
Right. So is there anything more that you wanted to talk about? Because I sort of cut off your commentary / presentation earlier.
No, I'm fine. Are you finished now talking about the freeze response?
Yes. That was an awfully long response. I must have gotten
It was so long, but we're going to get through this.
Yay, okay. Go ahead,
Okay.
Miss Julie.
Okay.
Do I push
Put
you
the
forward?
big brain back up there. Go to the
Big
next.
brain? Okay.
Go to the next
Is that it?
infographic. And what you're going to see is, again, now these are the 3 brain regions that are primarily affected by PTSD. And I'm going to go through these very quickly because the next slide is something that's got a little bit more refined information. The prefrontal cortex that's your abstraction. It's where your personality develops. Behavioral regulation, making a decision. Yes, I think I'll do this. No, I think I won't do that. And then, planning and problem solving. It's all those things that, for those of you that might be school teachers or whatnot, it's your executive functioning, basically. And so the prefrontal cortex is actually heavily impacted by trauma, or more specifically PTSD. So if you have a trauma reaction, or you have complex PTSD or personality changes because of a traumatic event, if you've been given these diagnoses, it makes sense that you may need to use some supports that you wouldn't have normally used. Like if you've had a trauma and now you're trying to get back to work, maybe take a little notepad around with you to keep notes on what you need to do next, or certain dates or whatnot. Doesn't mean that your brain damaged. It's just sort of a leftover, and that's a very specific area of the brain that is affected by trauma. The other area that's significantly affected is the amygdala. That's basically your emotional, reactions, and it initiates like how to respond to certain situations. It's your emotional barometer. The hippocampus is related to memory, so maybe memory consolidation. It may be, more specifically, the hippocampus will pick out like your spatial memory. Anything that would be, academic in nature can include the hippocampus. And so you can see it's not exactly optimal. It's hard to believe that you're going to have a trauma and then you're going to go right ahead and do fine at work or keep on making A's with no kind of, awareness of, hey, I think my skills have fallen off a little. You're going to notice that, but you're also going to remind yourself, hey, this is a natural progression of trauma and healing from trauma. And as soon as we move through this phase, then some of these skills, will resume. So if you go on now to the brain with the light bulb, it's more specific in defining that the prefrontal cortex, the area that is responsible for mood and emotional regulation or rational thought, that when you have trauma, it actually shrinks the efficiency of the prefrontal cortex. So you may have more emotional reaction. You may be a bit labile. 1 minute you feel just normal, and the next minute you're angry and yelling or crying, or, some quick kind of hair trigger emotions. The other area of the brain that changes that is most affected by trauma is the hippocampus. And again, this is the area that would help you distinguish between like past memory and what's going on now. And that too, that area will shrink in its efficiency and use. And the effect is that you have this memory of the trauma and you lose that discernment between old memory and current memory. And so it feels like, oh, I'm reliving this awful trauma. It's happening again. Oh my gosh, what am I going to do? And so this is where, you know, that familiar flashback terminology comes from, or battle fatigue. But what people really don't really understand is that you are having a memory of something that's past and finished, but perceptually your brain, your body thinks it's happening right now. Example, a kid taking a car on a joyride, wrecking the car, and the car goes up in flames. So the kid is caught in the car, can't get out. And so there's, you know, everything's on fire. Well, when you get them then into a hospital setting, maybe they're in the ICU or whatever, then what you might see them doing, they may be able to talk to you. They may even be able to tell you what day of the week it is. But then suddenly they're kicking at their covers and they're yelling, you know, get it away, or I can't get out, I can't get out. It doesn't mean they're brain damaged. It means that real critical area, the hippocampus, is failing to say what I'm remembering is already past. So they're thinking, they're having a memory, but then they're thinking, hey, this is happening right around me right now. And so it's kind of, do you want to add anything to that, Dr. Latina?
Yeah, I think this is this is the best. I've been calling them infograms, and people have been laughing in chat. Infographic that I've ever seen, with the light bulb and the brain. Did you do this?
I did.
Oh,
Okay.
Is it copyrighted?
Is this copyrighted? No, I put it all together.
You should copyright it, and then I could borrow it.
Oh, okay. So then where the prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus, their efficiency is reduced by trauma. The amygdala becomes overactive. It becomes overstimulated. And again, that's the stress and the emotion and the angst that is often seen with trauma. So in a nutshell, putting that all together, the three areas most likely to be really heavily impacted by trauma being the prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus in terms of reducing the efficiency and increasing the activity or the overstimulation of the amygdala. And it causes higher order processes like problem solving to be underutilized. And so it can look like someone is very disorganized and highly reactive, when the reality is it's just a part of that overall trauma complex. And for people that work in this area, they recognize it and they know how to treat it and work with it. Okay. Now, the next graphic, again, it's a big giant head.
Is that it?
This little drawing between the trauma that shows that there are basically two avenues of response or consequences. There's mental consequences or mental reactivity, and then the biological consequences related to trauma. So those are two different domains that are connected to. This directly comes out of the trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy model, and it serves as a backbone for the kind of treatment that gets offered. Most people, because they're having the mental reactivity as well as the biological changes, like thinking that they're still in a car that's on fire. What happens is that they think, well, all I got to do is learn some coping skills. I got to learn how to calm down, and then I can get over this. The reality is that you need a therapist or a psychiatrist or psychologist. If you've experienced one of these terrific traumas, it's a really good idea to find someone who is educated in the biological basis of the trauma and how it affects the brain. because a lot of the therapy that you'll go through is going to focus on the physical aspect of your body. It won't just be cognitive behavioral therapy. That was a bit clumsy the way I said that. Is that okay?
Say that again, please.
that when you're talking about managing or getting treatment for trauma, that it is probably this is one of the few times that it would be a very good idea to find either a psychiatrist or a clinical psychologist to work with, because it requires to understand the full context of the trauma and how these symptoms and these behaviors are manifesting. The provider needs to understand the biological underpinnings of what the brain is doing.
And I would agree with that. In terms of the biological consequences of chronic stress and trauma PTSD can lead to chronic stress. It is amazing the impact that stress has on your hormones. One of them is cortisol, and how it can affect your sleep cycle. It can affect your appetite, lead to weight gain, uncontrollable weight gain, diabetes. It can lead to problems with diverticular disease, your gut. I mean, it's all so interwoven. And, somebody brought up the issue a few minutes ago about adrenal fatigue. That's a whole nother conversation, but it can lead literally, and that's a new concept, but adrenal fatigue literally leading to your adrenal glands getting kind of burned out. And then you get into a cycle of hormonal responses that are really driving your mood, but also your physiology. So it isn't just enough. I agree with you. That is where I think it's important to work with somebody like you that has great experience both in the physiology of illness and psychological illness, as well as the mental consequences, because I don't think it's enough just to say, I'm going to do breathing exercises and it'll all get better.
No.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm the first one to teach diaphragmatic breathing, but it's such a small part of that overall process of healing. The path to healing is actually something that is mapped out ahead of time, and you've got, as you negotiate the path between the demands of the body physically needing to heal, and then the demands of, let's call it the spirit, right? Like, it's been 6 months since I went with my friends and had fun. That 6 month period of no friendships, I'm working with some 12-year-old child somewhere who's had a terrible trauma. That 6 months of no contact with a peer group can be just as devastating and interfere with a path to healing as developing an opiate addiction if the child is having their pain managed on opiates and nothing else. So dealing with trauma, you need somebody that's got that, that has that experience to navigate the different areas, that you can be affected. And here's why I say you need that, because there is treatment. You can feel better. You can enjoy your life after trauma, but you need a guide, to manage what's happening. Okay, so we go to the next infographic. This is the happy one, because it's talking about this process, this path to healing, this multimodal approach, and what are some of the things that you're focusing on. Now, in trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, we talk about post-trauma growth. And so it's through growth that healing ultimately then will be achieved, but based on what your goals are. You're the one that sets the bar, the landscape for what you want to achieve and how you feel like you'll be happy and productive and healthy again after trauma. You don't erase the trauma. You don't make the trauma go away. You find some, you find meaning in spite of the trauma. You reach a place where hopefully the trauma doesn't continue to take from you the things that matter. Some of the things, the 5 domains that are associated with post-traumatic growth are the development of personal strength, that a lot of people will be amazed at what they've been able to overcome or what they've been able to survive. And I was reading an account of the people that got caught on the volcano that exploded, the tour group, mm-hmm. that even though there was so much loss and there was so much trauma and so much fear, they have come out of this now feeling stronger and more confident in their ability to manage just day-to-day problems. If I can survive the explosion of a volcano, then I can probably manage, get my light bill paid on time, kind of thing. So personal strength, developing a trust and being willing to work on having closer relationships with the people that are important to them in their life is another domain of post-traumatic growth. Developing an appreciation for life and for like veterans programs, working PTSD working with veterans that are diagnosed with PTSD, doing survival camps and four-wheelering and things like that. That just learning to feel and accept pleasure again, learning to accept that you're not always under attack, that there are moments to just stop and enjoy the beauty around you. Again, it sounds a little silly, but when you look at the whole picture of what it is that's being targeted, it's a really critical part of life. You're developing a healthy way of engaging life in all 5, domains. Mm-hmm. They develop post-traumatic growth, also appreciating the good that can come from new possibilities, the ability to look at potential in the future. And again, this is a goal that you've set that you're working towards to achieve. And then this focus on developing some kind of a spiritual, some sort of spiritual picture to know where you fit into a larger life experience and existential growth. These are also closely aligned to what cancer treatment centers use as well when they're working with their cancer patients. I'm talking about the mental health providers. How do you achieve these 5? How do you work towards these goals in these 5 domains? Well, the first is, developing brutally honest optimism, that it's okay to be optimistic. It's okay to seek pleasure. It's okay to seek peace in spite of having had loss or trauma. That just because you've had loss or trauma, being miserable doesn't make the loss and trauma go away. The loss and trauma is there. And so finding some acceptance for it and then being willing to seek out these normal human conditions of peace and pleasure is perfectly healthy and human to do that. There's no guilt involved. So having brutally honest optimism that, things can definitely get better. Also developing a sense of control. Sometimes it's just a perception of control, but certainly we can walk, always use the analogy of dominoes as steps that fall toward an ultimate final event. And so even though people will say, control is an illusion, we all have some level of control. And so therapy, trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, does focus quite a bit on developing control, being aware of your automatic negative thoughts that take your sense of control away from you, and restating to fact comments that highlight and illustrate those things that you in fact do have control over. I mentioned earlier this idea about developing effective coping skills. I'm not just talking about breathing, but I'm talking about really developing an awareness that there will be things negative that happen in life, because it happens to everybody. It's just part of life. There's good things and there's bad things that happen. And the coping style, or the coping skills that you choose to develop, that you develop these coping skills in a really mindful manner of, okay, here's how I'm feeling today. Let me try this and see if it helps. If it does, then you commit it to memory and you begin to use it in a really effective and purposeful manner. If you try something and it doesn't work, then okay, you found something that didn't work, get rid of it, try a new coping skill. So coping skills come in every shape and size. There's no, one type of coping skill. For some people, a coping skill may be, a hot bath. For somebody else, it may be a 3-mile run. For me, I get on my Oculus and I play my video game for, 30 minutes or an hour, and then I'm ready to go. So coping skill, your coping style is something that you do, again, with purpose and with goals in mind, and being very aware in the moment for choosing, hey, I think this worked okay, and I think this was great. Developing a strong sense of self after a trauma can be one of the most important things that a person can do in their path to healing. It can also be difficult to do if you're overwhelmed with the demands of the trauma. One thing specifically that you spend a lot of time on is developing your self-confidence after a trauma. I think universally, the people that I work with, I see this kind of this standard loss of confidence. It just seems to go along with trauma. You experience a trauma, your sense of competence and control and confidence is undermined, right? You can lose some of your self-efficacy. You can be a bit inaccurate in what you think you're capable of achieving, because maybe you've got a broken leg, or maybe you're, 60% of your total body surface burned. So this is the pathway to rebuilding your confidence is intricately connected to developing a strong sense of self. And it's also really powerful in helping you move forward and finding some acceptance and some peace, after trauma. Somebody will ask, well, what are the steps of rebuilding or building a self-confidence? And I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. Some of the comments that you will hear people say that have gone through this process of post-traumatic growth it's centered around these 3 areas. And the first is, after trauma and you're going through the process of therapy and you're beginning to heal, and now you're in a really good place. It's what we call post-traumatic growth. The first has to do with your self-perception and regaining your self-confidence, having accurate self-efficacy, building self-esteem, all that. Some of the comments that you'll hear people say that have achieved some level of growth after trauma would be, it was self-perception is, I've learned that I'm stronger than I thought I was. And most people would agree, to find out that you're actually a really powerful, strong, courageous person. That's a really great factor for which to define yourself. Someone who is strong and has courage and strength, that can open a lot of doors, right? The second area that we'll often see improvements or changes in post-traumatic growth is in interpersonal relationships, the ability to have a warm and intimate type of relationship with friends and family and even coworkers. And some comments that you might sometimes hear, my relationships are now my priority in life. Maybe that wasn't the case before the terrible trauma, and going through a real trauma and then the pathway to healing, both physically, spiritually, and mentally, can really make you realign your priorities and put the people in your life, number one. The third area that we look at is just a general overall philosophy in life, and some comment that you might hear from somebody that had post-traumatic growth and refining of the philosophy in life is, well, now I feel like I have a purpose in my life, or I have a greater appreciation for life. If you go back over to self-perception, they'll talk about, I feel stronger than I learned that I'm really stronger than I ever thought I was. I've got a lot of courage. This trauma has been the catalyst for me developing new skills that I'm proud of. I have confidence that I'm able to respond in a difficult situation or a novel, new situation. I have confidence in myself in protecting me, my loved ones, the people that are there. I think I can rise to the occasion and make good choices. And then the big one, I think that is healthy, is this idea of, I've learned to live in the present, right here today in this moment, and experience it fully and not kind of move past it too quickly. To have awareness of the meaning of the people and the things that I do. You can hear people say, I enjoy caring for others. I feel protective of others in a way that I never have before. I trust that I can count on others, even during times when I myself may have a need. I can help other people. I can't tell you how often I've seen people living in a hospital for 6-8 months, relearning how to walk, relearning how to use their fingers and their hands, and they're helping someone else that just came in. It will make your heart soar to see the human spirit, these people that have been really traumatized, helping each other heal and be happy and get through it. It's quite amazing. So in review for the post-traumatic growth, there are 4 factors that lead to post-traumatic growth, and that is brutally honest optimism, perception of control over events or improving your perception of control, developing a specific coping style that you're present and you're intentional as you're choosing which coping skills you're going to put in your toolbox of coping skills, and then developing a strong sense of self, which includes developing that sense of confidence that I talked about. The 5 areas of post-traumatic growth are personal strength, improving your relationships, developing a greater appreciation for life, unfolding new possibilities, and then finding or improving spiritual development. If you go to the next slide, it's a gray slide at the top. It's in purple. It says tasks to facilitate healing. Dr. Latina and I, we are simply providing educational information. In no way is anything that we've said or done, should it be construed as therapeutic in nature or establishing any kind of therapeutic relationship. And so what I wanted to do, the purpose of this slide is to sort of just give a bullet point of the types of techniques or activities that might happen in a therapy session over the course of this period of healing and growth, right? One of the first things is providing activities and experiences that support the person in just acknowledging and accepting that the trauma occurred. It can be very difficult to accept a trauma depending on what it is, especially. some of it is very personal, and there can be a lot of denial. Those of you that know Kubler-Ross stages of grief, denial, shock, all of that is included in this process of healing from trauma. And so even though you think, well, of course you got to acknowledge the trauma happened, of course it did. But when you're the one that's experiencing it, it can be very difficult to accept, that it happened. So we offer experiences and activities that will facilitate that in a healthy and humane way. We also teach people to accept the love and support of loved ones, or even strangers, other patients or other people that are going through the same process. We first work with the client to accept that help, and then we'll actually spend time working with parents or friends or husbands or wives in offering that help. Getting past the discomfort or the clumsiness, not knowing how to respond, so that they can get back into a true relationship where there's real communication, intimacy that's happening. We teach them to be competent in their self-care. We come up with all kinds of fun things to work around physical limitations if they have casts on, or maybe they develop a fear of going out in public. And so we do all kinds of things to get them back to a place where they can take care of themselves. They can just engage in their activities of daily living in a dignified and independent way. We also focus on the physical condition. That's where Dr. Latina comes in. People that the physicians and the physical therapists, they're the ones that are spending a lot of time creating trust in their body, even though they're experiencing, spiritual, existential crises. We also teach them all different kinds of mindfulness, meditation. They can go to classes that expand on that. Art classes are often used. Music can very often be used for this kind of thing. Going to movies together, doing anything that's creative. Part of this, let me be clear about this. This is not just about having fun and, passing the time. When you provide people creative experiences where there's reciprocal communication, there's laughter, there's problem solving, like in any kind of creative task, you're providing enrichment, you're stimulating the brain, you're stimulating new neural connections and growth. And part of healing from a trauma is developing some alternate and new neural connections to break up that one-way connection between memory of the trauma and panic. It's just a single one-way road. And so we want to build new neural pathways to other activities, and that slows down the impulse. And once they begin to be able to slow down the impulse to panic, then they'll have time to make a decision to do something different and avert the panic attack. We provide a lot of information and support in avoiding dangerous substances, reduce alcohol intake, only take your pharmaceuticals that are prescribed in an appropriate manner. We watch for the development of compulsive or compensatory type behaviors and try to correct that as soon as we can. Without question, everyone is healthier and happier when they have a routine, when they're on a schedule. And so that becomes something that we try to start as soon as we can. And then journaling is critical to overcoming the trauma that you may have experienced. Even if your trauma is something like you're in the 10th grade and your teacher embarrasses you because you don't know your eights in your multiplication facts. That's still traumatic. It may not be a medical trauma, or it may not be like a divorce, but in terms of your age, it's definitely a trauma that is age appropriate, and it can actually have long-ranging impact on your behavior. So journaling can really help people work through get grounded and make some sense of some things that initially felt really terrible. And then once they start some journaling about it, then they can develop more insight and understanding about who they are. And again, we're back to this idea of time. There is no timeline for healing. Healing is a process and a path that you seek to achieve daily in small doses, weekly and monthly in bigger doses, and ultimately leading to some big goal that you've set further on. But the important part is that you're the one that is defining your goal. All right, Dr. Latina, I'm done.
Well, this is brilliant, and brilliant both in a wonderful brilliant and also cognitively, intellectually stretching all of us, I think, myself included. This is such a great, I think this last task to facilitate healing is something everybody, as you said, whether they're in the 10th grade and they didn't know their eights versus whether they've had some horrible accident and lost a limb or anything in between, we can all benefit from this particular list. There are a lot of people in the chat that mention things that they recommend that they find helpful, which I agree, which really kind of merges with mindfulness, meditation, and fun creative, I think. Mm-hmm. And some people mention music, art therapy. I would love to add, and I would love for people to write down what things, but don't do it yet though, because it's going to be a little challenge. What do they do that is mindful / meditative, but might also be fun and creative? I'm going to give you one that has really been good for me. Not that I want to self-refer, but I'm going to self-refer. And that is my gardening, my herb, tomato, veggie gardening. And for me, it's good in two ways. First of all, any activity that one does that's creative and mindful meaning taking you into the present moment, where your focus is simply on getting a task done in the present moment. It is very hard for the brain to be both in the present moment and mindful and attentive, and in the past perseverating about some horrible thing. Right. So the whole concept of mindfulness is not just, I'm going to pick up my fork, slowly insert the food into my mouth. That's really not what mindfulness is about. It's really about engaging your whole self, including your brain, in an activity that is in the moment. We say in Spanish, atención plena, means total attention. You know, you could say, well, I can knit. Sometimes I'll knit. That's another thing. But that's not really mindful, because I could be knitting, talking, chatting, and laughing and picking up a coffee at the same time. Whereas when I'm gardening, I'm just giving this as an example, it requires me to be wholly focused on what it is that I'm doing. And why I also like gardening as a creative outlet for healing, for just me, right, is that it is a metaphor for the whole cycle of life. Right. And not only in the moment am I going, oh, this is a pretty flower, and oh, that, but day by day, I'm able to go, oh my goodness, that grew overnight. Oh, look at that strawberry, and now it's getting red. And oh, the bunny rabbit ate the strawberry. Oh, guess there are no strawberries or whatever. It can be so all-encompassing. And it also, gardening, I'm giving this is for me, makes me feel like I am making a contribution to the earth, to the well-being of the earth. So I think, backing up, mindfulness, meditation, and doing something that is creative and not destructive is a huge, huge aspect of healing from trauma, or just healing in general. Yeah. And then the avoidance of the addictive, compulsive behaviors. Yeah. And I think it's very difficult for a person to be involved in mindful, creative activities while sucking down a marijuana stick or whatever. It's very difficult, right? Very difficult. Yes. It's like saying I'm going to laugh and cry at the same time. I'm going to be angry and joyful. It's very hard. Okay, as an academic person, wonderful Alice says, I started working on my art, and that has helped me tremendously. That's wonderful. That is fabulous. So I guess what I would like to, now that Alice has offered this up, just for fun, this is an activity that I want to ask people just quickly put what they like. Somebody said puzzling or putting a puzzle together. So in the chat, I'm curious because I'm going to write these things down just as even to offer up as options for my own patients. What do folks find as a mindful, creative activity? So if you all feel compelled, please do tell us. And as we're waiting for some of these on a list, there was something else I wanted to talk about, and I wanted to dive back since we're on a true crime channel, so to speak. True crime with health and wellness and mindfulness is that I saw recently on other true YouTube channels where people there was a photograph allegedly of Dylan out running, going for a run. Mm-hmm. And then content creators as well as chatters saying, oh, she shouldn't be doing that. Or why is she running?
But she should.
Exactly. So
yes.
I wanted to bring that up as an example of what you've just said. Yeah. She's doing something that is wholly intricate and wholly involved in her healing process because she enjoys obviously running, and that can be such a healthy healing thing to do. Yep. So I wanted to take it sort of back to the beginning when I mentioned I invoke the names of the survivors and those that lost their lives. I'm going to invoke that at the end again. But I think it's really incumbent upon us as a true crime community, a social media community, that we be very careful about pointing fingers at other folks, and also that we not be the obstacle to some survivors or victims' families' ability to heal from trauma. And so we do live in a very coarse society right now. We live in a very divisive society where people say, well, if you like this, then you can't like that, etc. And in that divisiveness, especially on social media where you're sort of a keyboard warrior, I think we can be very damning to folks, whether folks in the chat, creators, or people that have been victims of crime. So I just wanted to really remind myself and remind all of us that part of what Jules and I wanted to do tonight is to present very concrete, and you've done a beautiful job. I just sort of sat back and shook my head. That was easier done. But you've done a beautiful job really talking in a very granular way about what is trauma, both from a psychological and a physiological perspective. What is trauma, acute trauma versus chronic trauma, and how do they relate? Yeah. And then what are the steps folks can take, both by getting professional help and in their own life on a day-to-day basis, to try to sort of spur their journey of healing on. All of that is so crucial, but part of what we also, Jules and I, wanted to do, if I may speak for you, Jules, for a moment, is to set the bar a bit higher than what it's been set with respect to encouraging folks, ourselves included, to not have a knee-jerk response when seeing what victims in the Idaho 4 case are doing or in other crime situations, but really try to look at their behaviors with a lens of better understanding based on the educational pieces we've presented tonight, but also with a lens of compassion and a lens of kindness. Because I don't think any amount of therapy, education, psychoeducation, conversation can help with healing if it isn't done from a place of kindness and compassion.
Yeah.
So I did want to go through the list. Do you want to, how do I do that? Jules, can you see the chat or no?
I can see it.
I don't know how to go back up on the list. Folks were putting things that
You should see beside the chat, you should see like a little gray box that you can pull.
I suddenly did. Let me see. Yes. Oh, well, I don't know what happened.
Thank you, Alice.
I may need my child to come help me here because I don't even see.
There she is. Magically appears.
Titi, I don't see. Titi.
I was putting all the people's responses up as they were writing them.
Oh, well, I guess I was too busy looking at the camera. So Titi, what were some of the things folks said? Can you just
listening to my classical reggae music collection, martial arts, yoga, someone mentioned gardening, a lot of gardening, resin pouring.
Yeah, that was interesting. I don't know what that is.
I've seen those on like TikTok and stuff, and they actually look so cool. I don't know. Those look so cool, but I don't think I'd have the patience for that. Someone said deep cleaning, which I love. Cooking, woodworking, painting, drawing. Someone said poetry.
Photography, I saw.
Photography. Dorsey wanted me to mention, she said digital planning and playing on her iPad.
Legos. You guys are totally into Legos.
Legos. Yeah, Legos are cool.
By the hour. So there's a lot of...
someone said quilting.
Oh, quilting.
I want to make a quilt.
Anything else? Praying, yard work, exercise, worshiping outdoors, says Jessica G. So there's some beautiful things that bushwhacking, I think. Back to nature, beauty. I don't know if I say bushwhacking. I don't know if maybe it's supposed to be walking. I don't know. Francesca, if you're still on, I was hoping that you could talk briefly again about the February.
Yes. So before everyone goes, I mentioned this at the beginning of the live, so some of you may not have been here to hear, but so recently, Mother has been monetized, which is great. And you've gotten a couple super chats here and there, and so we were brainstorming what can we do to kind of try to do some more good. I think that's been the whole focus of this channel, and just really, the trajectory of what we want to do. So we were discussing, and we're working on getting stuff behind the scenes kind of together. But our plan is for the month of February, a portion of the money that's made from monetization and a portion of the super chats is going to be donated to a charity of the viewer's choice. So we're looking for suggestions for any charities, good causes, nonprofits, anything that's near and dear to your hearts. Send them on our way in the chat. I'm going to try to write a bunch of them down in the comments of anything up till February. And before February, in the community tab, so hopefully everyone's subscribed, you can find the community tab. We're going to put something up. We're going to narrow it down to our favorite 3 charities of the month before February. You guys all can vote there where you want the portion of the super chats and the monetization money, where you want that to go. And obviously the one with the most votes will be the charity that we go with for that month. And we're going to try to do that for as long as we're doing YouTube. We're going to try to continue to do that. So yes, give us any organizations near and dear to your heart. I know someone earlier, whose name I cannot remember right now, said the 20, I already wrote it down, 22 a day, which is for veteran suicide prevention, which I have heard of that. We did it in high school. So that's one we're definitely going to throw in there. So yeah, so anybody know any,
there's another one dealing with trauma, Shriners Hospitals, they do childhood trauma.
Okay, St. Jude's, I see. So I guess Francesca, who, by the way, is my daughter and my moderator and my essentially boss in this domain. Not every domain, Francesca. Animal rescue places. Maybe you can jot down all of these. Also, that we'll be looking in the comment section of
and maybe
this.
some specific charities too, like we love the broad idea, but if you have a specific charity, could be as big or as small as you want it to be, but like some real specific ones would be really helpful that we can kind of look into a little more.
I guess I would add that I would really like to offer whatever we can to a charity. 22 a day was me. Huh.
It was Botanical who mentioned it earlier.
Be Botanical. Okay. And I'm not going to name any specific ones, but I know that there's one that my mother was giving to for a while until I brought it to her attention that less than 10% of donations actually go to people. It's the 90% goes to the administrators.
Yep. Well, big salaries.
Big salaries.
That's what we would be looking into more, is like what charities are really putting the most of their money. Obviously they do have to be paid a little bit, but like who is allocating the most funds to the work that they're trying to do. I think so. That's why we just want as many names and all that as possible.
And then
so with 22 a day, that's one of those where they're sending almost every bit of the money to the people.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
That's I see that Emily Flotilla says make sure that it's a bona fide 5013C. I agree with that because
that's why we're going to be doing all our research, and we're going to be a little bit of time, but the next couple of weeks that's what we're going to be doing.
And guys, honestly, there's some months where I get $33. So it's not like I get by monetization, I'm making a ton, but the whole idea is that, it could be like if I'm making, in other words, what's the old expression? If you got a penny, give it, and I don't know what's the expression, Jules? You know what I'm saying? Give it till it hurts. But it's not actually the amount. We'll do the best we can, right? But it's really the spirit in which, like Francesca said, we're trying to have a trajectory for this channel, is right. That it's trying to really make it a community and really try to do something positive. And so it's not like we expect that we're going to raise 1,000. No. It's just, and I think, Francesca, is it every month? Is it your idea that we would choose a different one, or what is your thought?
Yeah, my thought is that we will kind of do it month by month. So every month it will change. So we'll decide the one for February, and then in February we'll donate everything, and we'll also then, we'll also be planning next month. What do we want for the next month, kind of thing. So when we'll maybe do the last week of the month, everyone will kind of remind everyone to vote which one you want, and that's where we'll hopefully put things,
Okay. I think that's it for housekeeping right now. We just hope, thank you, Francesca. We just hope that folks will go to Jules. I don't know if Francesca's still listening, but maybe Jules is at allegedly innocent. My cat is eating paper. Okay.
Actually, it's at JotTube.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, it's different. Let me get my link and I'll post it. I hope you guys will come over. I actually talk quite a bit about true crime. Every now and then I add some mental health stuff, but I try to do
stay away from
stuff. But I know Dr. Latina has been so inspiring. I didn't have a choice. I had to come on and talk with her about.
Well, I hope you come back another time. I think another one of my lives, honestly, I think either later this week or next week, I'm invited a gentleman from Colorado to talk about he was in a fraternity and has been very active. He's in his 40s since then, but he wanted to present all the pros and the cons of the Greek life. So, so we're all over the map here. But it is not just that we do mental health, but Jules, you are amazing. Now, Marlena Cantu said, may I suggest a Cash App, which I would have to have my daughter help me with that, instead of the super chats. I totally agree with you, Marlena, because I think that the YouTube, or it's called YouTube, not the YouTube, I think what do they take, 35 or 40% out? Is that right, Miss Jules?
Oh, I don't know about Cash App.
No, no.
Oh, you're talking about YouTube does?
Yeah,
YouTube
yes.
takes right at 30.
Right.
Like
And
20,
so
it's like 26, something like that.
yeah. And so if it's Cash App, I think, or PayPal, I'll talk to Francesca about this. Then it just goes. Then what is donated, we can send that, and then YouTube doesn't skim off that 30%. So
Yeah.
we'll see how it works. We'll.
So I don't have the ability for some reason to type in the chat.
Really?
It's not. I don't even have a bar that I could add chat. Now the private chat.
Wait. You mean the comments? Is that what you're saying? You've got to press on comments.
Yeah. But if you look at
private chat.
Sorry, Francesca.
No, it's okay. I was going to say, if you put it in private chat, I can just put it into the main chat.
Okay, so I put my link to my channel there, but the special little phrase is at JotTube. It's JOTTUBE. But the link is in the private chat if you want to post it. So I hope you guys will come to my channel and say hello and hit the subscribe button. And
so I have a question for you though. Let me see if I can. Oops! Are you still there?
I am.
I
think you kicked your daughter.
Oh, sorry, Francesca. I'm trying to figure out if I wanted to put it in a banner. Oh, I can do that. I know how to do that too. What, did you change the name of your show or your channel?
No, it's allegedly, the name of the channel is Allegedly Innocent. But when you type in www.youtube.com/@JotTube, then you go to my channel.
So if I want to put a banner up right now, because I can't do I just put @JobTube?
I don't think the banner is going to allow people to click on it. That's why if you put it in chat, which I just did, it's easier because then they can click on it and they can go there.
Okay, but can you put that is Jules's channel?
Yeah.
I guess.
But you see where it says channel and then it's got all of the alphabet behind it?
Yep.
If right behind where it's got the backslash, if you put an @ and then JOTTUBE, that also takes you straight to the channel.
Does mine do that, or did you configure that yourself?
There's a place that you can set it to do that. Yeah,
it's easier. All right. So basically, folks, we'll go all the way up to that www, and then the slash, and then get rid of that capital UCF or whatever. Just put @JotTube. I see. Very good. Okay.
Also, someone was asking if Jules could put in her community section her infographics. Just thought I'd let everyone know.
Oh, sure.
And I couldn't figure out because a couple of them, the way they came through to us and through StreamYard, were a little blurry. Is that because it came through several platforms? Are yours clear as a bell?
I thought mine were all clear.
That's interesting.
Strange.
Maybe it's,
do you remember which ones they were?
The first one. Yeah, where would we be without our kids, right? It's true. But Jules, I think you have you're more tech savvy. I'm getting there though. And I do appreciate my children. I really do. All right. So the only other thing that Titi, can you put in the post my Maricumba 79? And people can, if they want, they can email me a request because I have about 4 journals, like blanks, and I have a couple that are specifically for domestic violence. That for the first 4 people, maybe 6 that get to me in my email that would like me to mail them, and I will keep their address and name confidential. Oh, that's good.
You're a sweetheart, Diane. Thank you.
Yeah, there you go. I will send you free, like you won something kind of thing, a journal. So Titi, shall I put my email?
Just put it in your description of this live when we're done.
I see. Okay, so go to the description, guys, and anybody who would like Kathy says, my daughter is an MD PhD and I call her to make my email work. Yeah. So I will put in the description as we say goodnight, I will put my email, my YouTube email. That was the cat. And if folks want to ask, and they're one of the first 6 that ask for a journal, just put journal request, put your name and your real address and your real name. I will not give it out. It would be a violation of confidentiality. I promise you I would not. And then put your channel number, like Jessica, I'm just using this _G or whatever, just so I kind of get an idea of where I'm sending, were you really in the chat tonight? So that's what I want to do. It's the first 6 people. I'll do a giveaway of a journal. And I think journaling is a wonderful thing to help with healing. Anything else, Miss Jules? Please go to Miss Jules' channel and subscribe and like.
I just want to thank you for inviting me to do this. I had a great time both last Monday and this Monday. I almost wonder if maybe we shouldn't try to do like a weekly show,
I would love to, if you feel like you want to. I would love to. What if, should we ask if folks want that, or?
Sure. Okay,
put a 1 in the chat if you would like a weekly show. Hi, Mr. Tyler Feller. Great to see you.
Tyler.
I don't know if he was here for a while. And put a 1 in the channel if you'd like. Don't leave, Tyler, because you're going to end with a prayer for us. Thank you. So don't leave, man. Or 2 if you don't want a weekly live. And it doesn't have, we went 2.5 hours. We could get it down to like an hour or something.
Yeah.
But what I have to tell you something funny. I do speak very, very slowly. That's the way I learned to speak. That's how my parents taught me. And so the other night, my other daughter, Dorothy Camille, and I went back to one of mine, and I put myself on 1.75, and I sounded normal. So, like, Mom, you got to learn to speak. And then, Tyler's like, blah, 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 but I just can't speak that fast. And I think that's why my little episodes take 25 minutes. If I spoke like a normal person, it'd be 10 minutes. So I'm working on it, folks. Oh, lots of 1s, folks. Lots of 1s.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's great. All right. Can Tyler come up to the backstage? Because we're going to have him say a prayer for good night, and then we're all set. If he can come on.
You got to send him the link.
Oh,
thank you, Jen.
Okay. So can you send him the link? Oh, no. How do I do? Oh, I know, I think. Let me figure this out. I'm getting there. Where would I send the link to?
I don't know.
You can just put it in the chat, and he'll
click on it. Could be like, I don't know his contact information.
If you look down at the bottom, you see where it says invite. It'll give you a link
in the chat. I got it.
Yeah.
And that invitation is for
Tyler.
Mr. Feller. Did it go? There we go. I see. Thank you, Dorsey. Okay, we'll wait for Mr. Feller. Oh, yes, please, with a quadruple 1. Oh, that's good. Very good.
That's good, isn't it?
Yeah.
Good. I like that.
I do too. What a great idea, Miss Jules. Oh, here comes the astronaut. Hello, Mr. Feller.
Can't hear you.
Hello, Tyler. One moment.
Okay, you should be able to hear me now. I'm so sorry.
Now, hello.
You guys are so amazing. You definitely should do a show together.
Oh,
I think it was at least 101s. So that's unanimous.
Oh, that's good. Did you hear any of Jules' presentation on trauma?
I missed it because I was driving, and it's not safe to be on your phone while you're driving.
No.
So I couldn't click on the link. Because somebody texted me after I already started driving and said, Dr. Latina's on. I'm like, oh, I got to check it out. So I haven't had a chance to watch it yet.
No worries, but it was really good. And we talked a lot. She talked a lot about the whole journey of how do you actually, get over PTSD and whatnot. And we also sort of sprinkled in the fact that we need to be very careful as a community, I think, on YouTube, not to, really bash people who've been victims of crimes or are survivors of crime, and judge them, but really try to lift them up as they begin to heal from their PTSD.
I agree. It's kind of hard because it's like there's a fine line you have to walk of being observant about what's the potential causes of what's happening in cases. And so if you're doing good journalistic work and you're covering cases like we tried to do our best in doing, but yet we want to be sensitive to what's happening, that's a really tough dynamic. So,
it is tough because sometimes we have to be honest and say, and one thing I did say, and then I'll hush and let you help us to end this stream. One thing that I did say is that, we can have empathy, i.e. for, let's say, Bryan Kohberger and maybe some of the stuff he went through as an adolescent, and try to understand, maybe some of his own childhood trauma that led him to be self-loathing or whatever.
Yeah.
And we can be, but at the same time, we cannot therefore just erase everything that he may have done in this crime and say, oh, it's no big deal because he had PTSD.
Forgiveness is not forgetfulness.
Yeah, that's good. Forgiveness is not forgetfulness. Exactly. So yeah, it is dicey at times. I really agree. So we're going to say goodnight, and we're going to ask you for a brief prayer because you're our
the YouTube
pastor.
Yeah.
YouTube chaplain. There you go.
Yeah. So I love that. Thank you for the opportunity. So Father, in the name of Jesus, I thank you just for an amazing two women that you put together to be a gruesome dewsome fighting against the forces of evil in this world and sharing light through YouTube. And I pray that favor continues to rest on them. And I thank you for everybody that's been on this chat today, that they'd be enlightened and everything that was spoken really under the authority and power of the Holy Spirit would rest in their hearts. And I thank you, Jesus, that there's a closeness and a nearness that's being felt even just through the conversation that was held in such grace tonight for the two that we know were inside of the house when this took place. We thank you, Lord, that you're doing a new work in them. And I just pray in the mighty name of Jesus for a closeness of your proximity to rest on them. That's what your word says. And we declare your scriptures over them, which your promises in scripture according to you are yes and amen. And we pray for the families of Maddie and Ethan and Xana and Kaylee, that they'll continue to find resolve in you. And Lord, I pray that through this, they'll actually be called to a greater purpose that you put them on this earth for. And so we just release that over them as they sense even supernatural peace that surpasses all understanding. And so we bless them in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Good.
Amen.
Thank you, Tyler.
Amen. Thank you. And I'm going
Thanks,
to
guys.
say
Have a great night.
Yeah, have a wonderful night. Good night. Good night, Miss Jules, and good night, all.
Thank you, Dr. Latina.
Okay.